Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our deep dive into this radical feminist book. Hopefully we can come up with some good solutions, rebuttals, and understand their perspective so that we may combat it more easily. Inshallah. Let's begin. Bismillah. The idea of the biological clock is a powerful one, and we apply it not just to fertility, but to every field of a woman's life. It is as if just as we start to get things figured out, we're told that's it, you're done. The plain reason for this is because the world remains terrified of adult women. What the hell? You're terrified. And of adulthood in women, even as it relies on them to do the bulk of the work that keeps society running. See, this is what the bulk of the work that keeps society running. And what is that exactly? Let's write infrastructure. Because young girls should be taught this. Do you want to be smelling piss and urine in 90-degree weather as they repair a sewer pipe? A lot of the people who fix the laundry machines are men. And a lot of the people who build the laundry machines are men. It's quite odd how many women don't even see or appreciate what men do. And something that's really fascinating when you think about the hadith about how there will be women in hell because of they're ungrateful to their husbands. And at first you can get mad at that, but when you just see today how men are taxed heavily, yeah, women get taxed too, but these men are in the glaring heat doing roofing, refurbishing cars. A lot of men do extraneous jobs. Yes, some women do those jobs, but women don't want to do those jobs and they gladly let men do it, yet they will ridicule men as if what they do isn't hard. I've mentioned this before. We need to just have these game shows where it's real. Pick random men and pick random women, put them on an island and do some type of bushcraft survival that isn't scripted, and let's see how they do and how they cooperate in the inner politics and, how will women survive without men? Let's just see. And do it in different climates. The rigid winter, super tropical with lots of insects. Let's do like a really tough desert one and make these women do things when they're on their period. And we'll just see, who does more teamwork. The men with their brotherhood and fraternity, or the bitchy, catty women who can't get along and who won't stop gossiping about each other. Because it isn't an either or, but you cannot sit here and pretend that the stonemasons, the electricians, the plumbers, the construction workers, the engineers that are predominantly done by men, the slaughterhouse workers, the fishermen who go out there and get you your lobster and such, that suddenly now they don't matter. So you got your long dinosaur nails and your umbrella eyelashes and your shiny lip gloss and you think you're all that. But if we had to make you go hunt your food, we had to make you grow your own food, how well could you do? How many women would even be able to slaughter a chicken? That used to be a commonplace thing, but today women are so bougie or so lazy or so high on drugs and whatnot, they don't want to do that. And so, what are you talking about? It's just the lies that these women tell are infuriating. Even as if it refuses to allow women to ever truly be young. Okay, what does it mean to be young, to go get ran through? This is what she's saying here. Okay? You don't have the same clock as men, and that's okay. I wish someone would have told me that, because I could have decided to have more children. But trying to get pregnant again is more difficult in my 30s than it was obviously in my 20s. And so you have to think about that. It's just real, and it's almost like she'd rather women just be lied to. Women are supposed to look young, but they are rarely allowed to actually be young. Yeah, look young because men are more attracted to that, and women are crave themselves to be beautiful forever. Hence, Forever 21, the store. They don't want to be old. They don't want to lose that power that their sexual allure has gained them. The older you get, the less sexual power you have. This is a fact. This is a fact. You don't get to be like, oh, I'm 20, so I get to sleep with 100 different guys, and I want to start having a family at 37. It's like, no, that's not really how reality works for you, hon. With all the awkwardness and error and allowance that implies. This is not just unfair, it is an enormous waste of human talent. How is it a waste of human talent? You want to help those women not create mistakes. The role of men and women are different. She wants to erase that. It's the consequences for women are very different than men. Everyone deserves time to develop, learn, and make mistakes. Well, what type of learning are we talking about here? Because remember, she said she was mocking the hit the wall of the red pillars. Remember that. When I first learned about this phase, I was intrigued, and then when you really look around, you do see the pattern. Women will absolutely go through a hope phase, then they hit 30, and now they're spiritual, and they want to settle down, and now they want, like, a really good guy, and it's like, when you sit down and someone actually points that out to you, and you're like, wow, that is true. That's very true in American culture. It should be the opposite. It's wow. But again, there are a lot of women who they don't want that kind of angle of truth and perspective to be told to women because they value promiscuity above honesty. Everyone deserves, I read that. The persistent idea that women are entirely adult at the moment they hit puberty has ceased to be of social or cultural importance. The moment their fertility starts to tail off, it's bad for everyone. Okay, so fertility culture. Now, today, abortion culture is what rules. Abortion culture. So, death versus life. Ingratitude versus gratitude. Seeing children as a gift versus seeing them as a burden. A lot of women, they want to abort their children because they want to have more sexual escapades. They choose the men who are terrible, who will be terrible fathers, and who don't really like them. And they get their 10 minutes of fun. They allow the man to finish inside of them. They don't want the responsibility. They like to get high and drunk and go to P. Diddy parties. And then all of a sudden, oh, I have to have an abortion, and then a child and pregnancy become a burden because of the lifestyle they're living. But if they were moral, ethical, classy, modest, and pious, religious women who understood that children are adorable and that your husband is a good guy, then they would look at it quite different. You would appreciate fertility. And then when these women start paying thousands of dollars for IVF and the purely demonic surrogacy movement, they're totally willing to use someone else's fertility because they spent a lot of time not appreciating their fertility until they hit the wall and realized I was wrong, feminism was a lie, and now I have to pay another woman to grow my kid. And it's like, that child deserves breast milk, that child deserves to be cuddled with the woman who grew the child. That's the real parent, not just the genetic person who contributed the stuff. It's a sad thing. I really hate surrogacy. But these women will mock and degrade fertility, whereas other cultures for thousands of years there was fertility things. And the weirdest thing about the fertility cults is that they're usually giant phalluses. They literally would take the male organ and worship it. They loved it. They made carvings. They were just obsessed. The rabbit and the eggs, how fast they breed and multiply. But today you just have death cults. Moloch. The question is cause more social harm. The extended grace period afforded to so many young men, or the truncated time women get to experiment and truly be young. See what it is here? I told you. Get to experiment. So she wants to be like, hey, you need to have sex with 70 guys to get experiments. Pretending that men and women have the same connection to intimacy, which they don't. It's quite fascinating when you sit down and you look at it. It's not okay. A lot of women who have extremely high body counts have forms of mental illness and trauma. And they're very... You have to also talk to some other women and be like, if you knew a woman had intimacy with 60 men, would you trust her as much as, let's say, a woman who has had 3 men her whole life? Who's going to be more likely to be easy to get into bed? The one with the higher body count or the one with the lower body count? Because clearly the one who has been so easy to access has a proclivity to promiscuity, and the more promiscuous a woman is, the more untrustworthy she is as a friend, as a companion in this realm, and around your husband and your sons and any male in your family. You know, we had this expensive, like the tramp, the hood rat. Those were actually real problems, because those women will gladly spread diseases. They'll gladly sleep with married men, break up homes, and sell themselves, you know. So it's quite strange. A classy way of looking at it is you need to keep that number as low as possible. As low as possible. It's just so different, because the way women age is different. You only have a small blooming period, and a 50-year-old man can still be attractive, but a 50-year-old woman can't. These feminists, they're in deep denial. They're in a deep denial. You can do other things in life, but there is no denying that rose isn't going to stay in this perfect condition forever. Even if the flowers dry, the leaves fall off the tree, the ice melts, that's just the way it goes. And George Clooney can be looking good, and women have to spend twice as much money to look good. And a good example of this would be how many old men, let's say 50 years old, they're making adult content with 18-year-olds. You see that way more than if you see an 18-year-old lad making adult content with a 50-year-old woman. And those 18-year-old women will gladly accept the money from those older men, but a young lad, he's going to have more of apprehension to be like, I have to do that with her. You know, I'm not saying that they wouldn't, but it's more disgusting. It's more of like unnatural. Not everybody's like Macron of France and his old woman. You know, you can have respect and honor. Like the Prophet, peace be upon him, he had affection for Khadija, but she bore him children. And the other thing though is Aisha was in Salama, like most of the other wives were younger than Khadija, you know, so it's something to look at, something to be examined. But be careful when a woman tells you you need to experiment. You can experiment with your husband. I used to think some men wanted women with experience, and I still believe that. Like, if you look at Myron and Fresh and Fit, who do they have intimacy with? It's all women with experience. I mean, Walter literally got an escort pregnant. She's paid to have intimacy, and he got her pregnant. Yeah, she got an abortion. He told her to get an abortion. She did. But he still was doing reels and public content with her. And so, you know, look at LeBron James has his wife who has held him down since day one, he says. But he was going and having these P. Diddy parties. So just really look at that. Really look at it. who the men cheat with, and yeah, they keep their wives, but the wives still get cheated on. The men don't desire just one, but some women, they can be truly happy with just one man. And a lot of women carry the mental trauma of a bad relationship different than men. The more honest we are with each other, the more we can get back to the roots of who we are spiritually as women. Because I feel like in the past this was more known and women understood this, but feminists, like, they want you to free bleed, go armpit hair. They do like obesity acceptance. It just doesn't make real sense to me. Allowing men in our spaces, calling men who wear dresses women, like, feminists have really messed the whole structures up. So don't believe them when they try to compare when men, young lads, experiment and young girls, because when I see these young girls in the ghettos and you can just see they've been ran through, it's a different type of pity you see on them. They feel dirty. I mean, it's still gross when you have a fornicating young lad, but it's almost like it's just a different energy. It's not right because we want to prevent zina, and both would be flogged in Sharia law, but I feel like it's just you have more empathy for the lad, and then you see the young girl as stupid. It's more disgusting when it's your daughter. If it's your son, he loses his virginity, you're like, well, he's experimented and he's gotten to see the other side of the wall. But when it's your daughter, it's like a disgusting betrayal. Like, how could you be so dumb? Why did you just let someone use you and toss you aside? Are you a damn retard? It's a totally different thing where you can cry and weep, and it's painful and it's uncomfortable. You know, you want to have a pure, good daughter. You don't want to have, like, a stripper daughter. But I can't imagine the shame. Like, imagine having Cardi B as your daughter. The absolute shame. She cheated on her husband, boyfriend, whatever the hell he is, while she was pregnant. So notice that these values, she's like, experiment. Yeah, experiment even when you're pregnant. And I was wondering why I was seeing so many screenshots of pregnant women on dating apps in, like, lingerie. People, like, these women get L's, Twitter pages, X pages. They'll like show, like, absurd dating profiles. And the frequency of pregnant women seeking to hook up with men who are obviously not the father of that child, it's alarming. Okay, she would probably call that, oh, you're just experimenting, you're just getting life experience, when in reality, like, that type of behavior is so demonic that you're like, how could imagine your son, your brother comes home with a woman who you know she was slanging it while pregnant on a dating app. Would you even want such a creature to share your bloodline? It's really quite grotesque. It's a mistake that people do, and they need to do better. The emotional stunting of men and the wasting of women's talent are both cultural wounds in their own right. Together they are a sociological disaster in the making, whereby those who are allowed time to mature are rarely required to do so, whereas those who are expected to shoulder adult responsibility way too young are not allowed time to develop the skills they might need to be an actual grown-up. Okay, so who are expected to shoulder responsibility. Look how many people had to face war. They're in refugee camps. They're waking up. It's when you allow your child not to have chores and responsibilities that they become an adult child. A Seth Rogen pot-smoking slob. way too young or not allowed time. Oh, yes. A broken value system is behind all of this. A human metric whereby men and boys are valued as people, and women and girls, whatever their age, are valued as bodies. I get what she means by the body, because women judge each other by their bodies. This was reminding me of the Barbie movie, where one of the Barbies, a fat one by that, fat ugly one, is like, we want to be more than just like of decorations or ornamentations. She said something like that. And you're like, what's wrong with being beautiful and adored? And then when a woman calls herself, oh, I'm a goddess, and it's like, wait a minute. So you think it's okay to be a gold digger who calls herself a goddess, but you don't think you're an ornament? They'll be like, sprinkle, sprinkle. And you're like, okay, you literally are admitting that you don't want to cook, you don't want to clean, you want a man to fund your lifestyle, and you just want to be pretty all day, and you don't want to do the hard infrastructure jobs, but then you're trying to pretend you don't need men. When your lifestyle is something that millions of women will never have and cannot have if the planet is to sustain itself. It's the patriarchy that values women for their beauty. If women were all ugly and didn't have the beauty card to play, then it would be a very different world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given women the gift of beauty to where they can just be beautiful, and because of a man's erection, he will do many things for her. She starts not being beautiful, starts being bitchy, cold. She no longer stimulates him very much. He's going to want to get rid of her. Or he'll find, well, the halal way would be to have another wife. Right? You keep your first wife because that's your duty to maintain her. But if she starts just being a complete nightmare and turning into an ogre who belongs in the woods, well, that's not going to be well for him. Men can pull for quite some time. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, they're pulling quite beautiful women. Leonardo DiCaprio. But women at that age can't do that. So, yes, there's an aspect of your body and beauty and allure that allows you to have an advantage in this world. And the trans are men who have given up, and now they're trying a new strategy of survival, where they don't want to work hard, now they want to be the prize. And then you have women who work and pay part of their man's bills, so they're valued for their financial stuff, not their beauty. Whereas that man saves some money because she's working and paying bills, and he spends it on a side chick or spends it on OnlyFans. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at this angle, but I think we're all seen as people, but this woman, I doubt, would find obese men attractive. So let us not pretend that women don't value men's bodies. There's like that stupid balloon popping game, and tons of women who'll be like, I need him to be this tall, in shape, chiseled jaw, he's got to have abs, he's got to have, perfect this and perfect hair, and it's just like, wow. As if women don't look at men's bodies. See how she's very disingenuous? As if lesbians don't look at attraction. Women are assumed to be mature enough to consent to sexual activity as soon as they are physically post-pubescent. Yeah, you are though. Because those girls are doing it. They're doing it. In the middle schools in California, they hand out condoms. These are youths under the age of 18. Okay, there's condoms available for them. In the community clinics, there's free condoms. You just gotta walk in, grab them, and that's it. Okay, so most girls, puberty can be around 12, 13. So if she's 16, she consents to it because she's doing it. These high school girls, they act like they're already 30. It's pretty scary. Especially liberal parents, the way they dress, you're like, this is crazy. And they're listening to Sexy Red and all types of debaucherous music, but this feminist is pretending these girls aren't seeking out intimacy. It's really quite odd. They should be seeking marriage. And this argument is still successfully used to acquit child R-worders in courts of law. But if if it was a little boy who wanted to get his tallywhacker cut off at 16, she'd probably say that's fine. But now she's saying a 16-year-old chick that she has zero desire to have intimacy. Meanwhile, American youth, especially girls, lose it before 18. So, it's really quite strange. Whereby simply looking sexually mature is frequently assumed to be in and of itself consent. A lot of these girls, some girls do mature and bloom faster than others. And the mental capacity of each youth is different. You should encourage marriage from the get-go. When maturity is discussed in the public sphere, it is couched in the language of traditional life milestones, things a person is supposed to do, and increasingly to own. For men in particular, adulthood is still supposed to consist of external commitments to wife, a family, a sensible full-time job, a house, a car. Part of what has been called the modern crisis in masculinity relates to the sudden impossibility of acquiring these things. Well, look how the tribes, they were living in teepees. They didn't have a house. Think about that. Think about the soldiers Genghis Khan went with. Do you think that those men had difficult time wooing the ladies? Tribes and huts. Look at the tiny huts in different cultures. Look at the small dwellings people lived in. And then you'll see that if a man's got it, he's got it. And how many... This is even more funny. How many ex-felons who are attractive and have great bodies, they have a mattress on the floor and they have they don't have any problem getting bimbos. Zero problem. So, I mean, when I met my husband, he didn't have a house. He had a motorcycle and an apartment, and his body was like that of Hercules. That was enough for me, really. Well, plus other attributes, like, personality-wise, very stoic, kind of mean, but stoic and grumpy, but very serious. I rarely laughs. I didn't. Now, what I want my daughter, I want her to have someone who's financially stable. Don't get me wrong. But just because you don't have a house and you don't have like a debt to a bank and a mortgage doesn't mean you're not a man. When my grandpa was younger, like his house, he bought his first house for like between $11,000 and $13,000. In California, you can buy a home for $900,000 and it's still no yard and in a bad neighborhood. So you should never judge a man's masculinity based on like inflation. Is it better to have a tiny cottage in a suburb where you have some land, you can have some animals, or is it better to live in downtown Manhattan and Uber everywhere? Different people have what they like, and each state has a different lifestyle. Okay? And how many women are planning to retire with their husbands in another country? Mexico, Puerto Rico. Well, Puerto Rico is part of the United States territory, but it's not like one of the states, right? It's a territory. Or they want to live in Hawaii. They like the islander life. So, you see what I'm saying? You can't call someone not masculine just because they ain't got like a house. If an apartment costs $4,000 in some nice New York City area, you could get a $4,000 home in like per month in another part of California, and it wouldn't be a very good neighborhood. See what I'm saying? So, and the car, like I said, I used to have to ride on the back of my husband's motorcycle when I was pregnant. And when the baby was born, I had to take the bus. Then later we leveled up. We were patient. And I wouldn't have left him just because he didn't have a car. When you're attracted to somebody, you're gonna go the mile. Now, I'm not saying every woman has to do that, but I'm just saying that it exists. A full-time job, well, you gotta have some type of income, but now there's so many hustles people can do. But if you're part-time, that don't make sense. You gotta be working, because you want to be a stay-at-home wife. So I'm not sure what she's trying to say here. As every such crisis has done over the centuries of capitalist accumulation. If you phrase manhood as something you can buy, what happens when most young men can't afford it? No. Manhood isn't something that you buy. It's not that you're buying the house and the car, but rather it shows levels of duty, levels of commitment. Because to manage a house is a lot of work. When you have an apartment, you call the landlord. They send over the maintenance man to fix stuff. Inshallah. It's part of their job as a property manager. But when it's your own house, if the pipes burst, you gotta call like the plumbing and they come over. Something goes wrong, you're responsible for it. You gotta know how water heaters work. You gotta change the filters. You gotta, if there's like a bedbug infestation, you can call your landlord. They come and they pay for the spraying. At least that's how it was in California. But if it's your house, now you gotta call someone to have that done. You see what I'm saying? So, like, when I need my drain snaked, like when hair clogs, departments, like, would in the past, they take care of that. But when you have your own house, you have to call the company to do that. You gotta pay. You see what I'm saying? So, we don't pay, like if you have an apartment, how do we put it? You don't pay for the water. But if you have a house in some places, you have a water bill. You see? So it all depends. Whatever situation you have, there's going to be responsibility. Okay? And do you want to have a house in a bad neighborhood, or do you want to have an apartment in a good neighborhood? Something to think about. So manhood is a lot more than just having those milestones. And in some places, it's not really worth to have like a car. In some places, it's like there's safe public transportation, but you should have a car. But I'm just saying, it's popular now to Uber, take Lyft. They want to invent 15-minute cities so that you don't need to have a car, so some people cycle places. There's a lot of different ways. For women and girls, by contrast, maturity is usually defined by their capacity to care for others. This means that the qualities deemed necessary to adulthood are strictly divided between the binary genders. Yes. It is still commonly assumed that girls mature faster than boys, but the truth is that girls are simply expected to grow up faster, to manage their own emotions and anticipate the needs of others in a way that men and boys are not asked to do until much later, if at all. This aspect of male privilege, the privilege to remain a perpetual adolescent who whines and lashes out when asked to consider other people's feelings, is corrosive to the character. Now, male privilege of perpetual adolescent. Didn't she just say that men they're expected to have a wife, family, full-time job, house, and car? Okay, but now she's saying they're told to be perpetually adolescent. When you are financially ready to take on those burdens, you level up. Because a man who has a woman he likes, he matures. There's some women who, they just are very ditzy and airheaded, but once they have a child, now they realize, uh-oh, I need to change. And I just saw a study that talked about the changes women go through once they have children. And there are men, once they hold that newborn in their hands, they're like, yes, I'm going full dad mode. I'm in my dad mode era. Not all men do that. But the woman must ask herself, why did you pick a man who didn't want to be the provider? Why did you pick a man who was in perpetual adolescence? Why did you attract that kind of a man? Why did you accept him? Why did you stay with him? Personal accountability. Not just constantly looking for others to blame. The privilege to remain ignorant of the harm one is causing is more damaging still. This is in part because culturally rarely expects from white men the maturity to be able to distinguish between wanting a thing and owning it, or the adult capacity to consider that one's desires must be balanced against the autonomy of others. Okay, so this is a lie. So it's rarely expected from men to be able to distinguish between what you want and what you own, and to consider your desires in a balanced perspective, and to recognize the autonomy of others. Of course, she's acting as if, like, Greeks and Italians... Okay, let's put it this way. Greeks and Italians for a while were considered white, and then they were considered non-white. So is she telling me that Russians, Scottish, Irish, French, the traditionally white cultures, the Icelandic people, you're telling me that the color of their skin has determined that these negative attributes about them? So that all white men in these white countries are evil from all these different backgrounds? I don't really believe that. And the lack of her ability to hold women accountable and to just write a racist book where she's just dunking on men is reprehensible, to be quite honest with you. Of course men consider other people's desires, and they recognize autonomy. Of course. How many philosophers do we have of men compared to women? And these young lads are reading quite a lot of philosophy. They're reading quite a lot of theology as well. It's like, even if you look at the writings of the Buddha or the Tao Te Ching or Sun Tzu, like, it's constantly like you'll see that men do have these thoughts of greatness and balance and to relieve yourself from suffering and to be steadfast, all this stuff. But she just throws that all away and pretends as if women have contributed as much philosophical content to the world. It's quite a delusional human being, I must say. That's a mood familiar to anyone who has tried to explain to a toddler, while gently prying their fingers off a stolen toy or treat, that just because they want a thing doesn't mean that the thing is theirs. Now, this is a terrible, what a witchy way to describe it. But it's not every toddler steals, okay? And if your kid is walking around the store taking candy, it's usually because they've seen you do it, and you're not putting them in the shopping cart and managing them. Alright, so that's bad parenting if your kid's doing that, even though they have a natural curiosity. Now, see how she put it in a very evil way? Like, prying the fingers of the toddler open. They're naturally curious beings and don't understand that things have a price tag. That you gotta pay for them and go to the cashier. Unless you let them start to hand money over and you explain to them. If you tell a little tot, Mommy needs to pay for it first, hold on, they catch on pretty quickly. Show them a receipt, engage them, they learn pretty quickly. But do not compare a man to the fact that a little tot is learning about property and prices. If they're still pooping in their pants, they shouldn't be expected to have full maturity. That bawling, grasping impulse straight from the id is the sort of innocence that deserves to be regulated to childhood. But it seems to have become increasingly forgivable in adult men in positions of power. Not the same. This is not even a good example. Our collective commitment to white male innocence cost our species much too much. Any society in which the amount of personal responsibility a person has to take for his emotions and behavior is in inverse proportion to the amount of power and privilege he has. This sounds a lot of like, if you look at the let's say National Socialists, mean Mr. Mustaches people, the NAZIS, right? They felt that there was certain nations that shouldn't reproduce and that they are inherently bad. That they thought that their bloodlines, and racial pigmentation made them superior to others and more intelligent. And then you have people who say that the Ashkenazi Jays are the highest IQ and therefore more worthy and more important than others. When you start to frame things in a eugenicist type of way, like what she's doing, I find that to be quite reprehensible, and that is what she's doing here. She consistently attacks whites. If you were to insert black in here, the book would be banned and the author would be not be able to go into Oakland or anywhere else. She's written a book insulting white men, yet not one white person has harmed her. And she doesn't see the irony of that. And white people allowed her to write a book where she was spreading anti-white hatred. Whereas if you were to write a book against the Chinese, then you would be in trouble. And if you wrote a book against the Chinese and tried to sell it in China, and the Communist Party got wind of it, well, you're gonna have a problem with your credit score, ain't you? Your social credit score. They're not gonna tolerate that. And so I find this behavior of hers very bizarre. She's talking about privilege, yet she doesn't realize her privilege of being able to say the most racist things towards pale folk who are French, Italian, Scottish, Irish, Welsh, Dutch, all that. She's just slandering millions of people, innocent people, and putting them into a category because they're pale. It is quite sick. Any society in which the amount of personal responsibility a person has to take for his emotions and behavior is in inverse proportion to the amount of power and privilege he has. Any society where poor girls have to grow up fast so they can take care of other people, while rich men are allowed to be perpetual children, acting up and lashing out, will ultimately destroy itself. Let's just pause that. So, some girls, they have to help their mom change diapers of the little tots. Yes, some girls will have to be helpers so that things can get going while the boys are out, doing hard labor. I remember my husband would talk to me about the girls would stay home and learn house duties and the boys would be out on the farm, and it would be like 115 degrees. So this wench, this wicked woman, would she prefer the girls not to be inside, in the shade, learning house stuff, and helping out with the little babies? Or would she prefer them to be in the blazing sun, sweating, and chopping down corn, and taking up the pumpkins, and butchering the turkeys, and doing all that work? What would a little girl prefer to do, on average? Think about it. What would you rather do as an adult woman? I don't want to go out in the sun. Okay, let's think about when it's frigidly cold. And it's bitterly cold outside, and you gotta go melt the ice in the cow's water container. You gotta go do some stuff. You gotta go find a way to shovel frozen cow poo and hope your fingers don't get frostbitten. Should the women be inside tending the fire, baking pies, mashing potatoes, spinning wool, or do they want to be out in the frigid cold? Should we send the grandma who's 50 years old to go chop down a tree to make firewood for, later so it can dry out? Or should we send the 50-year-old man who's done it so many times and he's got muscle mass for it? Who do you think's gonna do better dragging that tree and hooking it up to a horse? Not saying women can't do it, but if you were a 50-year-old woman, would you rather your husband, your young strapping son-in-law, your own grandsons to do it, whatever, or do you want to go out there and do it? Let us really see what's going on here. Okay? Now let's look at the rich men angle. Rich men are never perpetually children. That's the biggest lie. They may be pampered, but they get to indulge more. Don't confuse having a posh party with being immature. Because managing money and preventing the vultures from scamming you is work in and of itself. It's a different kind of work. See, I don't think she's rich. That's why she talks about that. Because you'll see people who will be working at Wendy's. They get their paycheck and the money is gone faster. And they spent it on shoes and weed and beer and stuff they didn't really need. Okay? Whereas you will notice that people who have money, they budget a lot better. A lot of people budget who are poor because they have to, not because they want to. Whereas someone with money will still keep budgeting. Now, you don't want someone to be a miser or a hoarder, but to deny that people with money are more money savvy, they know the behavior of money better, to deny that is just dishonesty and reeks of envy, actually. To me, she's quite an envious person. Quite an envious person. People who are out smoking weed on Skid Row and shooting up fentanyl, they are the perpetual leeches on society. Because they're acting up, they're lashing out, they're pooping and defecating in the street. They literally are passed out on the sidewalk with their butt cracks out, not doing anything productive. Whereas the rich guy, he's answering emails, he's creating jobs, he's creating capital, he's paying a lot of taxes. So who really is the one who's allowed to slack off? Is it the rich man who has employees who depend on him to make that business run? Or is it the hippy-dippy drug addict who is perpetually high and in a strict coma in the street? That's tolerated, and it shouldn't be. So no. People with money, if they're paying their taxes, they're not breaking laws, and they want to go fishing for a vacation, that's fine. But if you're not contributing to society and all you do is use drugs and rob and stuff like that, and you're a public menace, that's quite different. So I don't even see her point here. Creating real social and professional consequences for abusers and predators is the only thing that will bring about the change we need. Oh, so let's say that for women too. More often than not, when this has happened to men, I have personally known, when they have been called to account for causing harm, they have not had careers to lose, because they were largely young and largely broke. Most of us are not working in glittery Hollywood studios or ancient government buildings, unless we're there to empty the bins. If you're on a 0 hours contract, your boss probably doesn't care how many bodies you have buried under your patio. as long as you turn up on time to sweat for less than the living wage. So the wage competition. Somebody once mentioned to me, like, why... I'm trying to phrase it how they did it. It was a while ago. Why should the government have a right to tell you how much money you have to accept to work? If you want to work for less, that's better than having no job. And then when you think... I remember working for an oyster company. They had a pretty good living wage, they would call it. But the prices were high and people didn't want to pay it. So when you raise the wages, it gets passed on to the consumer, and then the consumer says, this is too expensive, I can't buy it, and the only one who can afford it is upper middle class. You know, so you have 2 employees, pay each one $50, or you can have 4 employees and pay each one less. So the balance of inflation, how you earn, different sources of income, the cost of living, minimalism, ostentatious luxury, this is always going to be something over time. But some people don't want to grow their own food. They don't want to really find ways to be more sustainable. They want to live in the capital amongst the wealthy where they don't really belong. You know, living in poor communities wouldn't be so bad if they were cleaner and the people didn't throw garbage everywhere, and if the gangs didn't infest it. Then it wouldn't really be so bad not having a lot of money. If the area is clean, quiet, and peaceful, then it's really not so bad. But in the richer areas, the reason why they're so calm and quiet is because they're able to have the tax revenue for good police, and the caliber of people is better. So there's a reason why rich neighborhoods have less crime and poor ghettos have murders constantly. You know, the living wage angle is like, you have to compete. You want people to be paid respectable wages, but at the same time, if you're worth it, someone will pay you. Yeah, the Latinos, I see them out there by Home Depot. They buy where there's like the paints, they sell paints and window installing places. They stick their thumb out as you drive by. They want to work. I have never seen well, let me put it this way. There's been a couple times where I've seen someone who looked Latino who was begging, but I've never seen like a totally destitute Latino person from Latin America. I've actually seen the opposite. Domestic citizens, usually white guys or black, and they ask for money, and they usually look like they've used drugs and beer, where a Latino or a Chinese or someone from India just work. I have never seen a homeless person from India in America. I have seen one woman who was a beggar, but I've never once seen an Asian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thailand, Filipino begging. They are always wanting to work, even if they have to work a very cheap job. At the nail salon, because some of them, they have really low prices. They get around this living wage and stuff. They just want to work. They rather work than beg. You know, it's a fascinating thing. Fascinating. It's something to think about. Why should the government, if you want to have a kid, like a 12-year-old, like I had a blue card, they called it. I wish I still had it. In Utah, if you got a blue card, you could work as a minor. And I did. I had a paper route. And obviously I got 50 cents a house at that time. This chick would be like, you have to have that job can no longer be cheap for a kid, but has to be expensive for an adult. Well, now I don't get to learn about money. Think about that. If you have a lemonade stand where a kid wants to sell lemonades and you say, no, you have to have a living wage for the kid at the lemonade stand, you're like, man, we gotta sell how many lemonades per hour to be able to afford that wage? let people sell their labor for how much they want to sell their labor for. You know? It's up to you to decide how much you're willing to accept. And I do feel hopeful that there are people who, if you have expertise, they'll pay for it. And if you don't, well, you get what you get. But it's better than having nothing. Right? Something to think about. Because even if you raise the living wage, everything else still goes up. It's just a weird thing about money in general. Your friendship group, on the other hand, does care. Your family cares. Your reputation affects more than your ability to earn a wage. In fact, that's often the last thing to go. In workplaces and institutions, there are at least processes to follow, even if they are rarely put into effect, even if it's easier to just shut down the victims. But the process for community justice, by its nature, is not formalized. Who decides when and whether it's right to let a person with a history of abuse back into the community? Well, history of abuse being let back into the community. Aren't these leftists the ones who say abolish prisons and abolish the death penalty? Abolish the death penalty, abolish prisons, and defund police. Now they're saying abusive people shouldn't be allowed back into the community. But police get rid of abusers in the community. Prisons hold those abusers, and the death penalty rids the planet of those abusers. You see, these people don't make sense. They don't make sense. If you have social workers and there's less prisons and less cops, the communities are going to have to self-police. And that's not going to go well, because then that's going to go into vigilante, what is that called? Militia justice. So, she would probably hate that too, because she would call it fascistic. You just can't win with her. That's my point. You can't win with this woman. And if you look her up, Lori Penny, she's on Twitter. She has, in the back of the book, before I knew what she looked like, till I flipped to the back of the page and saw her profile, I thought she was going to be a different looking kind of self-hating white. But she's got black fingernail polish, shiny black jacket. She's doing like a very Vogue-esque pose. And she has like a pinkish purplish hair, and on her ear she's got like 3 piercings, so she looks exactly how you thought like a self-hating white would be. I bet you she's ethnically something. She looks like she has something in her. I wonder what her ancestry DNA test would reveal, because she does look a bit ethnic. Maybe part Greek, something like that. Maybe part Macedonian. I'd be very curious to see what she's made up of. You know. But don't let women like this poison the well, is my point. You can't let these women make you hate men and make you get confused about the role we women have. The wall is real. Women age different than men. There will be different requirements for men and women because we are different, and we don't have to be like men. So, be sensible, be wise. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide her to Islam and repair her fractured vision. And be safe out there, gentlemen. You know, be safe. If you get a woman who thinks this kind of stuff, I can't imagine that your home life would be very peaceful. So, keep that in mind. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like to support my work, you can go to www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there.